How's it going guys, Chris here, and today we're going to be running over all of those large monsters which appear in the base game of Monster Hunter Wilds. So Monster Hunter Wilds takes us to the Forbidden Lands, which is unsurprisingly chock full of monsters and creatures, all living out their lives within several different ecosystems, adapting to the ever-changing weather cycles as time goes on. Life here comes in many forms, and the monsters of the world typically fall within small or large categories, generally separated by their size and power. We're going to be focusing on all the big ones in this video, which are essentially the bread and butter of the game's hunts, with there being 29 of them in total, all having their own unique characteristics and behaviour patterns. Our journey pretty much starts off in the Windward Plains region, with that being home to a big armour-plated amphibian called the Chatacabra, a sort of frog-gorilla hybrid type creature with bright green hardened skin. These guys can be found wandering around through the cave systems to look for food, i.e. the big bugs that crawl around all over the place down there, often taking trips across the sandy dunes to reach a cosy little oasis in the middle of the desert. They are amphibians after all, and they'll desperately want to cool down in that refreshing pool of water. Probably the most notable thing about the Chatacabra is the fact that they've got massive squishy tongues, primarily used for hunting down prey, but also there to help aid the monster in combat. Being limited to shorter ranges, most of its attacks come in the form of slams, charges and dive bombs, but it can also lash that tongue around to essentially lick its opponents to death too. But despite being one of the creature's main weapons, that long flailing tongue can also be one of its biggest weaknesses, as it's also the softest part of the monster, unprotected by any of that tough skin. To complement the Chatacabra's attacks, it can produce a sticky mucus-like liquid from its forearms to collect rocks and ore from the ground, creating a strengthened barrier to enhance its beatdowns and make those arm strikes even more destructive. Next up is the Quematrice, aka the Brewstersaurus Rex, a monster that's clearly been inspired by a mythical beast called the Cockatrice, which is essentially a mashup between a cockerel and a reptile. These brute wyverns can be found plodding around the Windward Plains, typically searching for carcasses to feed on left behind by other predators, as despite being the size of a small truck and looking like something that had terrorised the cast of Jurassic World, the Quematrice is actually a scavenger rather than a hunter, mainly coming into conflict with smaller monsters over food and territory. It's got short stubby arms and powerful hind legs, but it hasn't got any wings, which is pretty typical of brute wyverns, though probably its most distinctive feature is a huge fan-like tail draped in layers of loose oily skin. In combat, the Quematrice uses its beak for pecking strikes, smashing its head into the ground to make it deadlier to approach from the front, also lunging forwards to snap out of its gaping jaw. But the creature's deadliest asset is generally that wide tail, which secretes a flammable oil-like substance that quickly vaporizes and easily ignites. So you've not only got to watch out for being flattened by that thing, but you've also got to watch out for being burnt to a crisp too. The Quematrice can sweep its tail across the ground to create friction, which ignites the substance, and unleashes waves of fire to scorch its surroundings, along with anything unfortunate enough to be nearby, often inflicting the Fireblight status too, which gradually depletes health over time. Anyone with arachnophobia, this next one's probably not for you. As we venture into the Scarlet Forest region, we'll be met by a very stylish monster called the Lala Barina, which falls in the Temnesserin classification, basically meaning that it's got a lot of spider-like features and similarities. Of course, we can't exactly call it a spider with it only having 6 legs, but Lala Barina definitely looks and acts like one, able to spin scarlet-coloured silk, which is used to bind their prey and construct massive webby nests. The monster's design blends together both the elegance of a dancing ballerina with the murderous nature of an assassin. And these contrasting themes tie heavily with the creature's physical appearance too, having all that fluffy white hair spread out over its abdomen and thorax, with all those nasty looking spiky legs protruding out from it. That abdomen ends in a retractable paralysing stinger, and its front legs can unfold into clawed, hand-like appendages, used for attacking its targets and wrapping them up for dinner. But along with having a sneaky stinger attached, that abdomen also houses a secret that gets exposed when the creature gets a bit wound up, opening out to reveal vibrant red petal-like bristles, giving it the appearance of a blooming rose, another thing it can use against its victims, aside from just trying to look a bit fancy. The red fur can actually be released into the air to paralyse anything it touches, being a handy tool for slowing down the monster's targets, helping to aid the Lala Barina in combat. And because it combines graceful pirouette-like movements with those sharp, often erratic leg jabs, this can make some of its attacks tricky to read and dodge, especially when you've got to avoid all of those red bristles floating around all over the place. One of the wackiest creatures we'll find in Monster Hunter Wilds is a big pink farting gorilla hippo called the Congalala, a returning monster in the series that likes to fight using some pretty foul tactics. These fanged beasts also roam around the Scarlet Forest, collecting and eating giant mushrooms scattered all around the undergrowth. Their bodies are covered in a thick pink fur, and they've even got their own funky head crests too, styled with plant oil to signify dominance and look like the boss. They're definitely on the goofy side, but the Congalala still shouldn't be written off as a simple fight, being a lot smarter than they look, while having a fair few nasty abilities up their sleeves too, and up other places. That mushroom diet really wreaks havoc on the monster's insides, giving it a variety of different gas-based attacks, which the creature heavily relies on in combat. These guys can go through more mushrooms than Mario, and depending on the type consumed, they can have very different effects on the monster's body, causing it to fart and belch out toxic clouds, emit blast blight, which can be ignited, or even cause you to become paralysed, leaving you wide open to getting sliced to bits by those Freddy Krueger claws, or flattened to death by a belly flop. Some of those farts stink so bad that they'll even prevent you from using healing items, literally forcing you to throw some deodorant on or roll around in the water to try and dispel the stench's effect. The Congalala not only uses that arm-like tail to snatch onto mushrooms, but it also uses it to launch nearby rocks at you too. And if there aren't any rocks around, well, it can always just pull a lump of crap out of its arse and lob that instead. As you do. Next up is the Balahara, a desert-dwelling predator which thrives in the dusty dunes of the Windward Plains, able to hunt other creatures, and yourself, by using the harsh environment to its advantage. Being a serpentine-style creature, the Balahara is perfectly adapted to its habitat, able to slither through the sand, like that big worm thing in the Dune movies, and ambush its prey with deadly precision. This is all down to it being so streamlined and flexible, with its long twisting body being covered in hardened scales, complemented by a tough carapace formed from fulgurite, which is basically hardened sand fused by lightning strikes. The Balahara uses those stubby little limbs and drill-like tail to propel itself through the sand at rapid speeds, even letting it dive in and out of the ground to pounce on prey, and chew them up with that tripartite jaw, lined with rows of chunky saw blade-like teeth. It'll use all of these tricks against its opponents in combat, burrowing beneath the sand to launch surprise attacks, such as lunging bites and body slams, and its ability to create massive quicksand traps adds yet another layer of danger too, pulling hunters and monsters into their lair while it lurks below waiting to devour anything unfortunate enough to get caught. Sand tricks aside, you can expect a fair share of its attacks to come from that rock-hard tail, with that being one of the Balahara's most useful tools and one of its most destructive weapons, able to be swept around and thrust forward to slap targets around with tons of force. The Balahara isn't just restricted to using physical attacks though, as its mouth is also full of thick gunky mucus, which can be spat out over distance to inflict water blight damage, slowing down stamina recovery speed. Not exactly a great thing when you need to evade something so quick and agile. A new fanged beast for the series, and one of the region's most feared, the Doshaguma is a highly territorial and aggressive predator often encountered roaming around in small packs, led by a dominant alpha male. This creature's got multiple stomping grounds, having a fairly widespread presence across multiple different biomes, highlighting its adaptability and desire to be the king of wherever it can physically survive. Doshaguma have a rugged muscular build, pretty much covered from head to toe in thick golden brown fur, with a shaggy mane wrapped around its neck and spine, sort of giving it the appearance of a beefed up lion bear. And it's easy to see why all the herbivores give these guys a wide berth, with them pretty much being at the top of the food chain. That said, that overly aggro nature and territorial ferocity does lead them into conflict with other big monsters, often being the culprits that kick off turf wars between rival creatures. When it comes down to combat, these guys are brute force powerhouses, relying on raw strength and aggression, as you'd probably expect. Those armoured forelegs and massive claws can deliver devastating swipes, slams and charges, capable of knocking you off your feet. And that powerful jaw can take a nasty chunk out of whatever it manages to chomp down onto. Obviously, taking a whole pack on at once will probably be as chaotic as it sounds, with the Doshaguma coordinating with each other to bring down their targets together, typically led by the alpha. Splitting them up using dung pods therefore wouldn't be a bad idea, though singled out monsters can still be very dangerous by themselves, especially as the fight rages on, as the more damage the beast sustains, the more annoyed it's going to get, which is only natural for something that's constantly getting whacked by a long spiky stick. Anyway, our next large monster is actually a very large monster, a powerful leviathan which reigns as the Scarlet Forest's apex predator. Uth Duna is a massive aquatic creature which thrives in the water-rich environments, generally seen basking in the stormy downpours, relishing the constant supply of flooding rain. Looking like a giant arapaima fish that sprouted legs and eating a crap ton of chicken nuggets, Uth Duna is a chunky but colourful beast with shimmering, vibrant bluey red scales. It's a bit amphibian-like in appearance, apart from that fish face of course, but its most distinctive feature is easily its translucent flowing purple veil, a protective layer draped out all over the monster's body and limbs, formed from a mixture of water and mucus, not only there to help absorb attacks, but also to add extra weight to the creature's own. The rising water levels enhance the monster's power and dominance in fights, hence why it prefers to pop up on very rainy days. And unlike some of the other creatures, fighting it can be a very dynamic and strategic job. Probably no surprise that a lot of its attacks are water based, and it's probably not a huge surprise that it likes to use that hefty body mass to crush its opponents under its own weight. The rushing waves generated by the creature can inflict water blight damage, and all of those belly flops and body slams can give you a pounding headache. But that liquid-like veil is kinda like a double-edged sword, as although it soaks up a lot of damage inflicted on the beast, it also slows the monster down a hell of a lot too. It's generally a good idea to break it apart, exposing Uth Duna's vulnerable body underneath, but just be prepared for the creature to retaliate with much faster, aggressive attacks if you do, with it now being a lot more agile down to its movement no longer being hindered. One of the most sinister looking creatures you'll find in Monster Hunter Wilds is a brute wyvern called Rompopolo. Pretty bizarre monster that prowls around the gloomy caverns of the oil well basin. Sorta looking a bit like Big Bird's goth brother, Rompopolo is definitely one of the most unique monsters in the game. It's got a weird mosquito-like beak, sharp mantis-styled arms that come to a point, a body covered in inflatable gas sacs, and powerful hind legs with gecko feet to help navigate the basin's oily terrain. All of these wacky features actually help the monster to thrive in its volatile habitat, and being a walking bag of toxic fumes, this allows it to capture smaller creatures by using that massive bubble butt to inject gas into the ground, ignite said gas, and then feed on all the poor little critters that come clambering out from underneath. Pretty crafty. These gassy tools aren't just there to hunt for dinner though, as they'll also be used against other bigger monsters too, making Rompopolo a fairly tricky opponent that adds poisonous explosions into its deadly array of attacks. The same method of using gas to blow up the floor is of course going to be used against you too, with those blasts kicking up hot sludge and poison, forcing you to stay alert and mobile. If the monster's tail swells up, then you know it's time to start moving. As for the airbags on its head, these are filled with toxic fumes, which can also be sprayed out into the atmosphere to damage opponents over time. With that said, bursting these body bubbles is temporarily going to reduce these attacks, limiting the creature to more physical based arm slashes and ramming strikes, while leaving Rompopolo feeling a little bit deflated. The apex predator of the Windward Plains, and probably our most imposing monster so far, Rey Dau is a very powerful lightning charged flying wyvern, and generally a bit of a badass. Having adapted to the sand tide when it typically likes to appear, the monster can store and harness the storm's intense electrical energy, only to unleash that supercharged energy onto its opponents in full force. With these guys being extremely territorial creatures, eager to attack pretty much anything on sight, it's no surprise that all of the other monsters in the region are on very high alert when a Rey Dau has just suddenly chosen to sweep on by. They all know that one's around due to the eerie wailing sounds that they make, emitted by the fulgurite formed on their armoured bodies, which are also covered in spiny golden scales to give the monster extra protection, and make it look even more intimidating to anything that might want to try and take it on. Essentially being a flying battery, Rey Dau's got powerful pterosaur-styled wings, but attached to those wings are huge bladed fulgurite-laden protrusions, enhancing the wyvern's aerial mastery, but also giving it more punishing weapons to lash out with, aside from that spiky, jagged tail. The Rey Dau's deadliest asset though is easily those large foldable horns, which can channel lightning generated by the storm and discharge devastating energy blasts like a high-powered railgun, particularly brutal attacks that are capable of obliterating huge chunks of health in one go. This gives the monster a pretty good variety of both close and longer range attacks, able to fly around and reposition and get a better vantage point, blending aerial agility with both physical strikes and violent electrical assaults, which are capable of inflicting thunderblight damage, increasing the risk of being stunned. Lala Barina isn't the only web slinger in town, as it's also got a pretty evil looking counterpart. Nerscylla's another Temnesseran monster, only this one's found in the darker, drearier corners of the Forbidden Lands, mainly lurking around the cave systems of the Ice Shard Cliffs, looking to capture and feast on other creatures caught in its massive webs. Looking like something that's just jumped over from Bloodborne, these returning monsters are pretty sinister in both their appearance and nature, draped in the skin of their unfortunate prey, wearing it over their bodies like a Grim Reaper-styled cloak, giving Nerscylla a bit of extra protection and making it even more intimidating to possible threats. Huge crystalline poison spikes jut out from the back of the creature's body, with bright orange pincers and claws acting as deadly weapons from the front. This monster thrives in environments where it can spin vast sticky webs, using them to dominate its territory and ensnare its unsuspecting victims. And considering Nerscylla is such a mobile opponent, this can really help to give the monster an advantage during fights. All of those web attacks slow its targets down, allowing it to lash out with powerful leg jabs and body slams, even having a sneaky trick up its sleeve where it can actually extend its retractable pincers and viciously snap them together like a pair of gnarly spiky scissors. Many of these strikes also inflict status effects such as poison, webbed and sleep afflictions, also causing health to deplete while putting you in some very vulnerable situations. And none of this is made any easier with Nerscylla also being able to summon swarms of mini hatchlings, adding even more chaos to the fray and giving you even more things to think about and dodge. Another monster that inhabits the Ice Shard Cliffs is a strange floating leviathan called the Hirabami, a pack hunter that typically chooses to hang around with others, being more effective in numbers. Hirabami sort of look like levitating purple king cobras, using sail-like rubbery membranes around their necks to catch wind currents which allow them to stay aloft above the ground, kinda like permanently being in one of those skydiving simulators. This gives them a very unique way of moving around, using their long fanned tails as a balance system, propelling them forwards and adjusting their trajectory. But this tail is also covered in razor-sharp scales and spines, and because it often hangs low to the floor within striking range, this might make it an easy thing to hit, but it's also something that can easily hit back too. Because of the way the Hirabami navigate around the environment, using each other for backup, this can make fights feel quite different compared to other monsters, requiring hunters to adapt to its swift aerial agility while being able to deal with multiple targets at once, putting those multitasking skills to the test. It's generally a smart move to try and split the pack up, by launching dung pods at the main target's buddies, as that's going to cause them to disperse, preventing you from getting slapped around left, right and centre. You can expect a lot of their attacks to come from that tail, and by swishing around and slamming into you from above, darting around unpredictably to make it a tricky opponent to actually hit back. Hacking away at that neck membrane will therefore help to disrupt the monster's awkward movements, but having the ability to spit out giant frostblight inducing ice balls from their mouths still gives them a deadly ranged attack that still might catch you out if you're unprepared. Another new monster to the series is the Ajarakan, an ape-like fanged beast that primarily lives in the fiery depths of the oil well basin. These rugged creatures have adapted to withstand the boiling hot nature of their climate, having hardened skin and rock-like armour, completely resistant to the intense heat and volcanic ash that surrounds the local area. Aside from looking a bit like walking rocks themselves, Ajarakan share quite a lot of characteristics with primates and gorillas, having similar kind of movement and general anatomy. But these guys are a hell of a lot more hardcore, not only because they've got super strong muscular physiques with jagged flame-like protrusions all over their backs, but also down to the fact that they've coated that thick scaly skin in molten metal, amplifying their attacks and abilities even further. As you'd expect from a big fiery rock gorilla, the Ajarakan's got quite a lot of distinct advantages, being highly durable, fast and agile, having the ability to climb, and the strength to pick up and throw heavy stuff over distance, generally using brute force to overpower its opponents, but also being able to manipulate the surrounded heat to turn the terrain into a deadly weapon too. This is done by igniting its hardened shell, basically setting itself ablaze, allowing it to reach high enough temperatures to melt the ground and even turn bullets into mush. The monster's still going to use a lot of physical melee strikes and slams when it turns into an angry fireball, but it can also generate powerful explosions and blasts, creating magma waves which ripple across the ground during some of its attacks. It's literally a very hot-headed monster, showing super high levels of aggression, constantly putting you under the risk of fireblight damage, being especially dangerous when enraged and set alight. But it's time to release the Kraken, and this nicely leads us over to another fiery beast which just so happens to be the oil well basin's apex predator, and also the first cephalopod-style creature to exist in the Monster Hunter series. Enter New Udra, aka the Black Flame, one of the game's most impressive creatures, being a huge slimy octopus-styled monster that terrorizes all of the other creatures and the people that live within the region. Aside from looking like a gigantic shadowy octopus with 6 large spiky tentacles and another 2 smaller ones guarding its mouth, New Udra doesn't exactly have a ton of standout features as far as looks go. With that said, it doesn't bloody need them. The monster's a sheer spectacle to witness, standing tall with its limbs writhing and lashing around all over the place, with its body drenched in tar-like oil silt, relying on alien-styled glowing blue sensory organs to navigate around that scorching hot environment. Being a massive cephalopod, this makes new Udra a very unique creature, with a completely different combat style not seen before in the Monster Hunter games. Though it still fights as you'd probably expect nevertheless, slamming its arms down and whipping them around to knock you around all over the place, wiggling across the arena and generally being a bit of a slippery opponent. But just like the Ajarakan, this monster can also become enraged, igniting the oil silk covering its body and transform into a squishy pile of flaming calamari, thus making way for a whole host of new brutal fire-based attacks. All of its usual slams and strikes are now infused with fire blight damage, also being faster and more relentless too, with new Udra constantly creating fireballs and burning puddles, even able to hit you with its very own organic flamethrower. Hacking away at those tentacles will eventually sever them, reducing the monster's reach, though for such a big creature, it's still able to slink away and squish itself into surprisingly narrow gaps and openings, adding a layer of unpredictability to its tactics. Venturing over to the ruins of Wyveria region now, which is overrun by an artificial monster species called constructs, created by an ancient civilization imbued with the power of other monsters, thus taking their form. These are known as the Guardians, essentially acting like strange variants of other creatures, one of those being the Doshaguma, which is now covered in thick white fur with glowing purple blood running through its veins. Like other constructs, the Guardian Doshaguma can't reproduce, doesn't need to eat, and solely relies on wyvern milk to restore its energy instead. That doesn't make them any less aggressive than the standard variants though. If anything, they're even more so, not having any commitments to being in a pack, even choosing to be hostile to their own kind instead. They'll also use a bunch of different moves and attacks to those standard variants too, despite looking very similar. The first thing you'll probably notice is that they've adopted a totally different fighting stance, choosing to rear up like a grizzly bear, plodding around on their hind legs to give them a taller profile. This can make them a bit slower, but their attacks will still be ferocious, with claw strikes able to release powerful explosions, and their gooey saliva causing corrosive damage, which can be spat out over distance to lower your defense stats. Because of the way the Guardian Doshaguma regenerates strength using that wyvern milk, they can absorb energy from their environment to charge up their powers and abilities, with said power not only helping to fuel those explosive attacks, but also allowing their wounds to heal up much quicker too, presenting a bunch of different mechanics, making fights feel even more dynamic. There's quite a few different types of construct monster, with another being the Guardian Rathalos, a creature that should be very familiar if you've played any of the past games, only with these guys having similar sort of traits to other construct type creatures. We'll actually see these Guardian variants before encountering the standard ones during the high rank endgame, with the Guardian variants being covered in white blotches and markings, with bright purple streaks glowing through the monster's skin. Once again being fueled by that wyvern milk, giving it unique powers and allowing it to sustain itself. Basically being a big fire-spewing dragon-type monster, the construct version of a flying wyvern, this allows the Guardian Rathalos to stay airborne, making it very manoeuvrable, and sometimes a bit awkward to hit, compared to a lot of ground-based opponents, often swooping around the battlefield, conducting attacks from high above. That Guardian energy running through its veins is going to enhance the Rathalos' moveset, adding a slight twist to its strike patterns, having a wide variety of both physical and fire-based attacks, just like the standard variant, but also with those same construct mechanics at play here too. Aside from those gaping wounds healing up faster, giving you less time to target them, more huge explosions can be generated by the Rathalos smashing its claws into the ground, with the energy often causing wilt crystals to form nearby, crystals that'll detonate if hit by the monster's raging flame breath, obviously being something else that you'll need to be aware of. One of the most standout monsters of the lot comes in the form of a massive leviathan called Jin Dahaad, the reigning apex predator of the Ice Shard Cliffs, which embodies the harsh, icy ecosystem of its habitat. This thing sort of looks like a metallic snake-like dragon with a long slender body completely covered by jagged spines and plates, giving the creature a brutal, almost mechanical looking appearance. Those sharp bony ridges jutting out sort of act like a cooling mechanism, not only helping to regulate the monster's very low temperature, but also affect its surroundings too, able to freeze the living crap out of everything nearby, and even give it the ability to stick to walls, and climb along said walls using the frost generated by its claws. Surprise surprise, with Jin Dahaad being colder than a brass toilet seat in Antarctica, it's going to use all of those blizzard powers against its opponents, generating clouds of super cool air, infusing them into attacks, while making itself riskier to approach from pretty much all angles. Frosty explosions and sweeping ice breaths make up for a lot of the monster's moves, aside from all the typical slams and lunges, and you can expect many of them to inflict frostblight and ice blight as well. both complicating the situation even more. With the cooling ridges being a big source of the creature's energy, you might want to aim for those to help weaken its abilities. A lot of its strikes can be foreshadowed by those heavy lumbering movements, though you'll definitely need to be aware of one particularly savage attack, where Jin Dahaad coils up into a ball, surrounds itself in ice shards, charges up its energy, and then completely obliterates everything around in a violent stormy blast, forcing you to take cover immediately or feel the full force of the monster's power. Using the environment is a key factor to winning fights against this imposing creature, not only allowing you to block some of its devastating moves, but also making it easier to chip away at that massive health pool, with Jin Dahaad withstanding a hell of a lot of flak to eventually bring down. Anyway, back to the Guardian creatures, as the Ebony Odogaron subspecies from Monster Hunter World's Iceborne also joins the monster list too, albeit in that artificial construct form. They look and act in a similar sort of way to their fanged wyvern counterparts, only now harnessing the power of that wyvern milk to enhance their moves and give them extra strength. If you're unfamiliar with these guys, I guess you could describe them as being like a strange mashup between a wolf and a crocodile, while being every bit as menacing as that sounds. Ebony Odogaron are covered in bluey black scales and bony protrusions, with spiky tails and even spikier claws, looking even more sinister due to the glowing red energy pulsating from their jaws, emitting plumes of black smoke, indicating their relation to dragons. Because these variants are constructs though, you'll notice that they've got all those Guardian-esque features too, having glowing purple veins and white scaly patches. Though that also means that they use the same sort of tricks as other constructs, quickly regenerating wounds, giving you less time to destroy them, while being able to combine those physical attacks with energy explosions, triggered by hitting wilt crystals that form on the floor. The Guardian Ebony Odogaron is up there with some of the nippiest monsters in the game, with fights being fairly intense due to the creature's constant movement and rapid flurries. It's a very agile monster, and it's got a lot of pointy things to use as weapons, putting even more pressure on you to stay mobile and keep up with the Odogaron's pace. But one monster that quite literally eats Guardians for breakfast is another cephalopod called Shaywu, a deadly ambush predator which hunts down construct creatures in the ruins of Wyveria, making it a massive threat in its ecosystem. Despite having a bit of an octopus-styled appearance at first glance, similar to new Udra, these things are definitely a lot weirder and more alien-like overall. Their bulbous heads are attached to an inky strand-covered body, while a load of strange golden veins run through the creature's skin and tentacles. Those tentacles secreting a thick, gloopy mucus that can be hardened to create sharp blades and spear tips to use against its prey, hence why it's sometimes referred to as the piercing assassin. Those bladed tentacles can be punishing weapons in combat, jabbed forwards and swiped around to deal huge chunks of damage, even able to be fragmented and flung over distance like throwing knives, giving the monster quite a few ways to slice and dice its targets from multiple different ranges. Shaywu's attack style is a deadly cocktail of speed, stealth and brutal precision, acrobatically diving around to slap its opponents with those thrashing limbs. Hacking the tentacles off is therefore a good way to weaken its attacks and movements, especially with it relying on them so much for striking and being propelled forwards. With that said, the tentacles aren't the only thing you'll need to watch out for here, with it also having a pretty deceptive secret. It turns out that mouth on top of the monster's head is actually a bit of a mimic. Its real mouth is a lot more terrifying, being on the underside of Shaywu's body, surrounded by hundreds of spiny teeth, and looking like something that will send you off to Davy Jones's locker. Of course, something that feeds on Guardian monsters is gonna need to have a pretty big gob, though it's definitely a pretty big gob that you'll want to stay the hell away from. So the flagship monster of the game, basically the one that you spend most of the main story tracking down, is the almighty Guardian Arkveld, aka the White Wraith. The construct version of a thought-to-be extinct monster species that's been wreaking havoc all across the Forbidden Lands. With the ruins of Wyveria being packed full of construct monsters, it's not exactly a huge surprise to see this thing there, being hell-bent on draining the power from other creatures, particularly drawn to feeding on other Guardians and their cocoons, with them being full of the tasty wyvern milk it craves. The Guardian Arkveld is a very unique monster covered in white scales and tufts of fur. A pair of ram-like horns poking out of its face gives it even more distinction. But the elephant in the room is of course the monster's powerful chain-like appendages, which are attached to its arms and can be lashed around to kill things, and even absorb elemental energy from other monsters unfortunate enough to be wrapped up by them. Obviously, we're dealing with a pretty powerful thing here, and seems the Guardian Arkveld is also a construct itself. That means it shares all of the typical traits of other construct type creatures. so you should probably expect a lot of deadly explosions too, discharged by hitting those nearby will crystal. The Guardian Arkveld is a relentless force, relying heavily on those chain blades to deliver some very crunchy slam attacks and whips, extending and retracting them, smashing targets around from range, or by sweeping them across wide areas to make those chains even trickier to dodge. It turns out that the true final monster of the low rank story path is actually an ancient weapon, which was created to defend the civilization of Wyveria, but ended up being the thing that ultimately destroyed it, leaving the place in ruins. A monster called Zoh Shia is the weapon in question, also being another construct type creature, albeit a super powerful uncontrollable one that was a little bit too powerful for its creators to handle. A few survivors did manage to seal the monster away in the Dragon Torch Shrine, where it waited dormant for thousands of years, sapping away on limitless energy, up until the point where you come along to disturb it from its slumber. Sorta looking like a futuristic chandelier, Zoh Shia is a very different creature to the other constructs, as all those years of absorbing wyvern milk has encased its skin in a pearly white crystalline shell, with these crystal formations completely covering its body and head, essentially making it look like a giant angel dragon with long sleek feathers. Being something that turned a whole civilization into rubble, you can expect this thing to put up a decent fight, being protected by that guardian coat while having the strength to knock you into next week. It mainly relies on powerful physical attacks of its wing arms, delivering sweeping claw strikes, charges and tail whips. And let's not forget about the explosions generated by all those wilt crystals popping off too. This might all sound fairly basic for an end of story monster, but Zoh Shia is literally hiding a dark secret underneath that crystalline shell. The more you wear away at that armour, the more the monster starts to reveal its true identity, slowly transforming from an angel-like creature to a pretty demonic one. Beneath that pristine exterior lies a coal-black monstrosity, with a distorted head, twisted horns, and a pulsating dark energy, which you'll get a glimpse of throughout the fight as you knock away parts of its shell. During these stages, Zoh Shia can lash out with a lot more elemental power, releasing energy strikes, blasting fire everywhere, to basically turn the place into a raging inferno, giving you tons of new things to dodge, generally making you feel like you're taking on a totally different beast altogether. But this is more apparent when the monster sheds that armour completely towards the latter end of the fight, with Zoh Shia now looking like a big fiery gargoyle, littering the room with elemental hazards and using tricks that can decimate your health if you don't get out of the way in time. A very dynamic battle, which becomes more challenging as it progresses. So onto the high rank endgame monsters, and the first one we'll get to meet is a fan favourite, the Yian Kut-Ku, a funny looking bird wyvern that you might be familiar with if you played some of the past titles. Let's just say a bit of a contrast from Zoh Shia. These pack-dwelling chicken dragons are typically found in the Scarlet Forest, roosting high up in the trees and cliffs during the season of plenty. They're pretty scrawny things with a skittish nature, using oversized beaks to scoop up insect creatures, and massive ear frills to listen out for possible intruders, being extremely sensitive to sound, flaring up like fans when they become agitated. These guys are definitely a bit on the goofy side, but they're still fully capable of ruining someone's day, moving quickly and erratically due to their small stature and light weight, also being able to spew out fireballs over distance, giving them elemental power to use against their attackers. The Yian Kut-Ku might not have a huge number of attacks up their sleeves, with them often repeating a lot of the same moves and manoeuvres, but being pack creatures, they'll often rely on each other to overwhelm their opponents instead. So for this reason, it's generally best to have some dung pods on standby, so you can fling them out at the monster's buddies to shoo them away from the battle zone. Lone targets should be a lot easier to take on, but they can still cause you problems if you underestimate their speed and strength. They're not quite as daft as they look. Another classic bird wyvern monster can also be found as a high rank hunt, with that being the ever so crafty Gypceros, which can be found popping up all over the Forbidden Lands in several different regions, being a creature known for its disruptive, devious tricks, and finding ways to essentially troll the player by breaking the flow of combat. Just like the Yian Kut-Ku, the Gypceros is also a bit of an oddball when it comes to its appearance. It's another goofy looking giant bird dragon type monster with a strangely shaped beak, and a prominent bulbous crest jutting out from the top of its head, complete with a long pink earthworm-like tail, and generally a bit of a funny bird-like posture, sorta looking like the ugly duckling of all the dragon-styled creatures. That doesn't make this thing any less of a threat though, as looks aside, this monster is the master of annoying the hell out of its attackers, sort of making it the Joker of the pack. It does this in quite a few different ways, one being a blinding flash that's emitted by that head crest, stunning its opponents and opening them up to the Gypceros' other attacks. Big blobs of poisonous saliva can also be spat out to hit their targets directly, or leave hazardous pools behind on the floor, causing continuous harm if you wander on through them, forcing you to keep chugging down on antidotes to get rid of that pesky health sapping status effect. That wiggling tail also happens to be super stretchy, extending to great lengths to slap you around from longer distances, like an elastic rope, another thing that might catch you off guard. But arguably the most deceptive trick of all is the monster's cunning ability to drop to the floor and play dead, only to spring back to life moments later with a powerful counterattack, punishing anyone nearby that gets fooled. The Queen of the Land makes a comeback in Monster Hunter Wilds, being one of the series' most popular creatures. The Rathian is the female equivalent to the Rathalos, with the two monsters often acting as partners in crime together, being territorial predators, sometimes teaming up to hunt down prey as a couple. Rathians are flying wyverns that can be found in several different areas, and they've got all the typical features you'd expect from dragon-styled creatures. Large powerful wings, thick armoured scales, an angry reptilian face, though a pretty dull coloration compared to a Rathalos counterpart, with that muted greenish sort of hue being one of the main things to differentiate them from a visual standpoint, aside from her back being covered in fur with a tail covered in sharp needles instead of bony spines. In a way, this is sort of similar to a lot of birds, with the males being bright and vibrant, while the females look a bit plain and drab. Though despite their similarities, they both act as individuals with different characteristics, having unique traits and fighting styles of their own. The Rathian generally prefers to be closer to the ground, blasting fireballs, smashing into its opponents, and thrashing that deadly venomous tail around to inflict poison damage, using its signature somersault tail whip strikes. It's not got a massive range of attacks, but the ones it does have can be chained together in unpredictable ways, with a lot of them also applying those pesky status ailments that need to be cured using specific healing items. We're not quite done yet with the construct creatures, as there's one more to be added to the list, with that being the Guardian Fulgur Anjanath, a monster that can be found during the higher rank portion of the game, also encountered in the ruins of Wyveria, much like the others. The Fulgur Anjanath is a thunder-charged subspecies of the normal Anjanath, with this Guardian variant being an artificially engineered version of that creature, basically an electrified T-Rex with big fan-like sails running along its back, having all those typical construct characteristics and abilities too, just in case this thing wasn't already nasty enough. All of these features help to complement the monster's aggressive fighting style, being a surprisingly agile creature that literally dives headfirst into combat, generally using the combination of brute strength, electrical strikes, and will crystal explosions to pepper the arena with crackling blue sparks and powerful blasts, lunging forwards to snap out with that dinosaur face, and swinging its barbed tail around to whack targets from behind. Aside from a lot of its physical attacks being infused with thunder energy, the Anjanath can also launch projectiles over distance to zap its opponents from further away, allowing it to strike from different ranges and inflict thunderblight damage to increase stun potential. You've mainly got to watch out for all those gnashing teeth, with most of the monster's attacks coming from its jaw, which is glowing with that Guardian energy, being the main source of those sparky detonations. We've already met the Guardian Rathalos, but the standard Rathalos becomes available to hunt down during high rank, being another iconic flying wyvern in the Monster Hunter series, and the male equivalent to that tail-swinging Rathian. Those vibrant red scales and black markings help to make the Rathalos easier to distinguish from the ladies, aside from its tail also being a large bony club instead of a pincushion, and with its general nature being a tad different too, choosing to spend a lot more time flying around, patrolling vast regions from the air, hence why it's known for being the king of the skies. Being related to the Rathians though, you can expect these guys to employ a lot of similar sort of tricks and maneuvers, spewing fireballs while flapping around above your head, with their venom reserves being located to those claws rather than their tail spines, meaning you'll need to watch out for a lot more talon strikes instead. The Rathalos' more airborne temperament also, unsurprisingly, means that they're going to spend even more time flying around, combining a lot of those flame attacks with strafing runs, dropping that fiery breath down on you from above. This gives the Rathalos more ways to attack from a safer distance, arguably making it a trickier monster to take on, especially when using melee-style weapons. One of the biggest, most threatening looking things you'll find lumbering around during the game's high rank is a colossal, heavily armoured wyvern called the Gravios, another classic monster returning from past titles, which now roams around the scorching volcanic caverns of the oil well basin. Sort of looking like a massive dragon made out of rocks and rubble, the Gravios is an absolute powerhouse that towers over most of the other monsters, having a body that's built like a fortress, completely covered in a dense stone-like armoured shell. Despite being classified as a flying wyvern while having a pair of large wings, because the monster's so bloody hefty, this sort of limits what it can actually do with those wings. So don't expect these guys to be flapping around in the air all day like the Rathalos, as they're going to be massively hindered by all that bulky weight. This also gives them slower movements, but their sheer size and strength can certainly help to make up for that, still being pretty awkward things to avoid at times, as they throw themselves around and attempt to squish you into the cavern floor. It's no surprise that the Gravios likes to rely on its physical strength most of the time in fights. At the end of the day, it's practically an organic tank. But just like a tank, this monster can also launch projectiles over distance, weaponizing its fire breath to burn targets from further away. It can even practically turn itself into Godzilla and blast out an extremely powerful laser beam to obliterate anything it connects with. So just because you're out of slamming distance doesn't mean that you're safe. Get too carried away hacking up the monster's stomach, and it can also release a load of harmful gases too, some of which explode, inflict poison, and even cause you to fall asleep, making it a very dangerous monster with very effective attacks and very effective defenses. Time for another monkey monster. The Blangonga returns from some of the past games, now popping up in the Ice Shard Cliffs during high rank. Known for being a creature that can thrive in the icy cold conditions, often seen leading packs of smaller Blangos, dealing with any intruders together. The Blangonga, basically acting as the alpha, is a pretty big saber-toothed baboon-like monster, surrounded by thick white fur, helping the creature to blend into its snowy habitat. They're definitely not as goofy as their forest-dwelling Congalala counterparts, generally having a much more menacing appearance, with a permanently pissed-off face, looking like something that really doesn't want to be messed around with. Being one of the biggest monkeys around, with a highly aggressive temperament, the Blangonga's not exactly going to welcome you to its lair with open arms, typically choosing to give you a frosty reception. It's a very physical fighter that likes leaping around and smashing its targets into the snowy floor, using raw physicality in combination with some fancy ice-based attacks, being able to launch big frozen rocks over distance and even blow out freezing plumes of cold air from its mouth. The monster's speed and mobility means that getting frozen by ice blight damage can put you in a lot of trouble, opening you up to some of the Blangonga's punishing beatdowns. If there's a bunch of their Blango buddies nearby, well, this can create even more problems, with them all working with the Blangonga to whittle down your health, and generally be an annoying distraction from the big guy, who's throwing all the heavy punches. Over the course of the high rank storyline, you'll discover that some of the monsters have contracted an infectious disease known as the Frenzy Virus, putting them into a super agitated state with heightened aggression and ferocity. The culprit to all this ecological mischief just so happens to be the demi-elder dragon known as Gore Magala, a very unique creature with enough power to mess with an entire ecosystem. This thing is basically like a massive demonic bat. It's a very dark, Grim Reaper-styled creature, draped in tattered cape-like wings that cloak its entire body, charged up with that purple frenzy energy, giving it a pretty evil-looking glow. It's all dressed up for Halloween, and to make the monster even more unique, the Gore Magala doesn't actually have any eyes, therefore having to locate prey by using special pollen-like scales on its wings, which are scattered around the environment only for them to stick to nearby targets, allowing the monster to sense their whereabouts via heat signatures. These very same scales are what's causing the other creatures to go berserk and become infected with that Frenzy Virus, which can also be spread by firing clouds of black fog from the monster's jaws. This is also something that will affect you too over the course of the battle, causing your natural healing to decrease, while also boosting Gore Magala's damage outright too, basically giving it a huge tactical advantage. Nullberries help to slow this infection, though whenever you've become riddled with Frenzy, it's typically best to just keep attacking and keep the pressure on, which might sound a bit risky, but it'll actually prevent you from succumbing to the virus, raising your metabolism to counter its negative effects. Though all of this can make Gore Magala a pretty challenging monster to take on, especially when it becomes enraged and goes into a frenzied state itself, bombarding its opponents with relentless strikes that hit like a train at full speed. So it appears that life found a way. Somehow, Arkveld returned, and can be encountered later on in the high rank storyline, being the game's true flagship monster, appearing in practically all of the main biomes. Being able to survive in such a wide variety of harsh and contrasting climates really shows off how resilient these guys actually are, bouncing back from extinction to reassert themselves into the world, sort of symbolising their untamed power and will to exist. They're not just some manufactured Guardian knockoffs, they're the real deal. The Arkvelds are obviously going to look and act in a similar way to their construct counterpart, But these organic versions are pure white and grey, without all the funky purple lights. Still having the same general appearance, but still looking just as impressive as ever. Bit of a mystery how these things actually fly though, having those fluffy little wings supporting that hefty mass. Being a creature that can sap energy from others using those retractable arm chains, it's fueled by the power of different monsters, able to unleash that power with devastating results. You can expect the Arkveld to use a lot of the same sort of tricks and manoeuvres as the Guardian one from before, with those chain appendages becoming the monster's main weapons to wreak havoc with. The supercharged dragon energy, siphoned and converted from the other creatures, allows the Arkveld to generate nasty red explosions, and massive shockwaves with some of its strikes, all of which can punish its opponents, having some pretty wide areas of effect. It's a true force to be reckoned with, and it wants to prove why it's on the front cover of the game's case. So those are all the large monsters from the base game, but there's also a bunch of smaller ones roaming around the different regions too. And if you want to check those out, then you might want to watch that guide next. The link for that video should be up on the screen and on my channel as soon as it becomes available. Subscribe for more content just like this, and give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Anyway, thanks for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.